At the end of yesterday's session, one of you came up and asked where Elijah stood in the list. And I had to confess that I had left Elijah off. Leaving Elijah off, oh dear, oh dear. However, having said that, Elijah, although he was a colourful character, has to belong to the little section of the prophets who appear unannounced. We know nothing of Elijah's call. He simply appeared and confronted Ahab. But once I start thinking on Elijah, I had to think on Elisha. And I find that Elisha's call is different from any of the others. In fact, there is no record that God called Elisha, certainly not in the way he called the other prophets. But he called Elisha through Elijah. So I'd like to start with that reading when Elijah has fled from Jezebel and hears a still small voice. It is found in 1 Kings 19, 11 and 12, if someone would like to read this for us. 1 Kings 19, 11 and 12.
The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper.
Gentle whisper, that translation says, still small voice. It is true that God often speaks to us in the quiet time. I feel that what God had to say to Elijah was something of a rebuke. And if someone would like to read verse 13, we'll see the question that God asked Elijah. Verse 13.
When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?"
What are you doing here? Well, of course, Elijah's place was back at Carmel, was it not? What are you doing here, Elijah? And verse 16, and here is a command of God to Elijah. Someone like to read 16 for us?
Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel Meholah, to succeed you as prophet.
Right, that is a bit gentler than what's in this. But you shall anoint Elisha as a prophet in your place. This version, or this translation, carries to me the feeling of rebuke. Elijah had fled from his post, and he now had the task of going and finding the man who was to replace him, who was Elisha. And Elijah obeyed the voice of the Lord, and he went and found Elisha. So Elijah departed and found Elisha the son of Shaphat. Elijah passed him by and threw his mantle upon him. So that was a call of Elisha. Elijah, the prophet, came with his mantle, took it off, and threw it upon the young man. And Elisha accepted that as his calling. There is, in the next two verses, the suggestion of a farewell dinner before Elisha rose and followed Elijah. Someone like to read about that, 20:21?
Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," he said, "and then I will come with you." "Go back," Elijah replied. "What have I done to you?" So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the ploughing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his attendant.
So there we have the call of Elisha. I was looking through the call of some of the prophets, the notable ones, and I nearly passed by the first prophet because I didn't really think he was a prophet. Abraham. I never thought of Abraham as a prophet, but it is there clearly in Genesis, and we have this little story of Abraham pretending that Sarah, his wife, is his sister. Genesis chapter 20 and 7 verses. If someone would like to read the first 7 verses of 20, here we find that Abraham is indeed a prophet.
Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed at Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead, because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister'? And didn't she also say, 'He is my brother'? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." Then God said to him in a dream, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return to the man's wife, for he is a prophet. He will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return to her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die."
Oh, what a tangled weave we weave when first we practice to deceive, I think is the little phrase I'm looking for. And Abraham, in this part of his life, found himself in deep water, having told someone his wife was his sister. But it all worked out well in the end, and we learned that Abraham was a prophet. So naturally, we want to turn to the call of Abraham. Genesis 12, the first 3 verses, it's a lovely reading. If someone would like to read it to us, the call of Abraham.
The Lord said to Abraham, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you."
And we read, Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him, and Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. The call of Abraham. I'd like now to move on to another of the great prophets, to the call of Moses and his reaction, for that is really what I'm thinking about this morning, the reactions of the prophets to their call. And if we turn to Exodus 3:11, we find that great story of the call of Moses. Exodus 3:11.
But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt.
Here is the excuse of Moses. Who am I? Who am I? And then in verse 13, we get a little bit more excuse. The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say? What shall I say? Who am I? What shall I say? Moses, of course, was told by God what he should do, but he was still full of excuses, and another excuse arises in 4 and 10.
And Moses said to the Lord, O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue.
So there we are, the three excuses. Who am I? What shall I say? And then, having been told what to say, but I am not eloquent. I am slow of speech, and I am slow of tongue. It is very true that he that believes has a witness in himself. Yet so often those who are called of God for any task, be it great or small, although they have what Samuel Wesley described to John Wesley as the inward witness, they find it difficult to express themselves. Moses said so himself. It is strange that those who are the false prophets find it very easy to express themselves. We know, of course, what happened with Moses. God told him, I have provided for you someone to do the talking, and it was Aaron, his brother. So there was Moses, one of the reluctant prophets. One of the greatest, of course, was Samuel. Samuel in the temple. And the call of Samuel is different, because Samuel was but a child. You remember his mother Hannah brought Samuel when he was weaned to the temple to serve the Lord. And so he belonged to the sanctuary there at Bethel. And the strange thing is this, that though Samuel served there at the altar, he knew nothing about the Lord whom he served. You will find this in 1 Samuel 3 and 7. 1 Samuel 3 and 7.
Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him.
So there we are, Samuel. That's right, very caught up in the work of a temple and all that happened there, and yet we are told in Scripture, I don't know if it's so in your Bible, but in my Bible it's in brackets. It's a little thought apart from the story. Samuel did not know the Lord. I take a lot of heart from that little verse, because, like yourselves, no doubt, I see so many lovely young people coming about our buildings, and they take part, and they like to take part, and they sing in our choirs, and they go through all the motions, and yet, as yet, they do not really know the Lord. They have not come to that point when the Lord reveals himself to them. Now, I'm not suggesting this morning that I do not believe in childhood conversion. I'd like to be very clear on that. I'm not suggesting that childhood conversion is not real. My wife Audrey, and I'm sorry Audrey's not with me today, she was invited, but those of you know Audrey, know that over the past few years she's had some major operations, and travelling by train is something which you'd find very difficult. But having said that, Audrey gave her heart to the Lord when she was only a child of 8.
Praise God. Praise God.
And Jesus says, whosoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. There is that rather frightening, I find it frightening, that rather frightening passage in Matthew 18. A lovely story, a terrible story. Matthew 18, 1-6. When Jesus is dealing with the children. Now, 6 verses. Would someone like to read it for us?
At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child and had him stand among them, and he said, "I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes one of these little ones, who believe in me, to sin, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck, and to be drowned in the depths of the sea."
A lovely story, a frightening story, but for my purpose the punchline is this: one of these little ones who believes in me. And on this I am prepared to build my edifice of believing in child conversion. I mentioned Audrey, 8 years old. She looks back to that time. She never turned back from being a Christian from that time. There was no backsliding in her teenage years. She went on to do a great ministry for the Lord, a compassionate ministry. She was, as some of you know, she was one of the Hebrew children, and she lived in Leeds. And she will tell me from time to time how that her mother used to come out when it was growing dark and shout up the road, "Toczki Mankowski," come home. Toczki Mankowski, of Russian extraction. She was interviewed by Ian Skidmore. That I don't suppose many of you know of Ian, because he belongs to BB Ek Radio Cymru, but well known in those circles. But Ian interviewed Audrey, and he called her his little Cinderella. The reason is quite simple, because the way the life worked out, Audrey was rescued from Liverpool Street Station, where she slept with her mother on the station seat for several nights. She was rescued from there, and in a very, very short time she was living in a grand house not far from Winchester with a real, genuine lord. So that's why Ian says she's a Cinderella. She came from the station seat to live with Lord Templemore near Winchester. But in between that was a time when she gave her heart to the Lord. As I said, she's never looked back. She has had a wonderful ministry, and has proved to be a good continuing comrade in the war, as our marriage service so quaintly phrases it. I'm sorry she's not here today, but those of you who know her will remember her. We did actually do a book about Audrey, and here's a little dilemma that comes to us all when we try to seek the guidance of the Lord. And we published this book, and it's sold well. We've done several editions. And just the other day I posted out the last copy I got, and I'm thinking to myself, should we do another reprint? Does the Lord want us to do another reprint? It's so easy to have your own feelings and act on them. It's much better when you know that what you're doing is the guidance of the Lord. That's a small thing. There are many, many things in life when we try to discern what is our own desire and what is the voice of God. God chooses his own time. God reveals himself. He did so with Samuel. And he will with so many of those young people that come around our churches and our mission halls. For Samuel, the message he had to give, like most of the prophets, was by no means easy. You will remember that Samuel had to go and rebuke the man who was his boss, to tell him the Lord had said he was wrong. He was only a boy, a child, but laid upon him was this prophetic message. And we find it in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 16. 16, 17, 18 and 19, if someone would like to look at the task that fell upon young Samuel.
But Eli called him and said, Samuel, my son. Samuel answered, Here am I. What was it he said to you? Eli asked. Do not hide it from me. May God deal with you, be it ever so severely, if you hide from me anything he told you. So Samuel told him everything, hiding nothing from him. Then Eli said, He is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes. The Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and he let none of the words fall to the ground.
The call of Samuel is different from the other prophets because the others were mature and knew what it was going to cost. Samuel had lived in the temple and didn't realize what it was going to cost to be a prophet. He learned very quickly. We then move on to Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 6 for the call of Isaiah. We get the setting there in the temple in the first 4 verses. If someone would like to read the setting for us of the call of Isaiah.
In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphs, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying, and they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke.
Quite a setting, isn't it? And then we get the response of Isaiah, less than enthusiastic. Verse 5, would someone like to read to us his eager response?
Woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty.
Yes. Isaiah, there in the temple, hears the call of God. He becomes aware of his own sinfulness. I am a man of unclean lips. It is true that when we come into the presence of God, when we become conscious of God, we become conscious of our sin. There is no dealing with God in a sinful state, in the sense that I mean that if we are not aware that we are in a sinful state. We cannot deal with God in a level of respectability. We can only deal with God through confession of sin. There is a lovely story that to me is a parallel to the temple in the New Testament. It is Peter. Luke chapter 5 verse 8. What has happened is that they've caught the great catch of fishes. And Jesus is now addressing the disciples. Here is Peter's reaction. Luke chapter 5 verse 8.
When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man."
The same reaction as Isaiah. I am a sinful man. Depart from me, it says in this translation. Depart from me. Go away, Lord. Your presence embarrasses me, for I am a sinful man. But what is the bottom line of Isaiah? Back we go to the book of Isaiah 6 and 8.
Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me."
Here am I, send me. I sometimes wonder if it would be permissible. The Hebrew scholars here will tell me if I'm right or wrong. I know there are some. Did Isaiah say, "Here I am"? Here I am, Lord. Because I have the feeling that he was sitting there or kneeling there in the temple, looking round and saying, who is it that should go? The Lord is calling for somebody. It should be her, it should be him. And then slowly he realized who it is that God is speaking to. That's why I suggest he says, "Here I am, send me." Well, that was Isaiah, and he responded in the end, but it was no easy task, and he knew. My next prophet of choice is Jeremiah. Jeremiah. Some people call him the gloomy prophet. Well, I don't think he was so much gloomy as he had tidings of gloom. And that was not his fault. But there is a wonderful call to Jeremiah. And the Lord says to him that his calling was even before he was born. And we find that in the 5th verse of the 1st chapter of Jeremiah. If someone would like to share it with us.
Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations.
Yes. And Jeremiah too has his excuses. Yes. Very reasonable. Verse 6. The excuse of Jeremiah.
Sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am only a child.
That's even worse than what I've got here. This translation credits him with being a youth. But the idea is the same. I'm too young to be a prophet. But the Lord said to me, verse 7 and 8.
But the Lord said to me, do not say, I am only a child. You must go to everyone I send you to, and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you, and will rescue you, declares the Lord.
Yes, you can't imagine this stern old prophet ever being a boy. I've heard youngsters in school expressing great doubt that their headmaster had ever been a youth. They were just made somewhere and sent to school. But you know, the contribution of young people has been very, very important. And in our own official history, it says that the majority of the leaders in the early days were from amongst those who had been converted in their youth, and while they were still young, dedicated themselves to the salvation of others. What a lovely quotable quote. That the leaders, and I think this is true across the whole spectrum of denominations, the majority of its leaders have been from those who were converted in their youth and while they were still young, dedicated themselves. Well, Jeremiah had nothing else to say to that. So that's a lovely verse 8. It's something that John should send to all conference speakers. We pass on to Ezekiel. Oh, time is running away here. It's terrible. Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 1.
He said to me, Son of man, stand up on your feet, and I will speak to you. As he spoke, the Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. He said, Son of man, I am sending you to the Israelites, to a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. They and their fathers have been in revolt against me to this very day.
The call of Ezekiel. It was a very spectacular calling. It's too long to read. But there's all this business about the wheels, and they were the colour of beryl. They all had the same likeness. A wheel in the middle of a wheel. When they went toward any one of 4 directions. They did not turn aside. The rims were high and awesome. The rims were full of eyes. All around the 4 of them. And so it goes on. This tremendous vision, which I've never really tried to understand. You may have studied it. All that struck me was that Ezekiel had a vision of flying saucers long before anybody else. We don't really get the response of Ezekiel. We just know that he accepted what God had sent him to do, and it was to go to rebellious people and rebuke them. Now the next character, he is quite a character, and it is Jonah. Yes. And he had a very immediate reaction, and it's the reaction of a lot of people when God calls them, or God speaks to them. Jonah 1, verses 1, 2, and 3, if someone would like to tell us what Jonah did when God called him.
The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord.
Thank you. I hadn't realised he was a fare-paying passenger. There he was. Must have been going steerage. I don't know if you've had the equivalent on your televisions, but in Wales we've been having Bible stories. You have? I was in Cymraeg in Welsh. But did you see the one about Jonah? Yes. You did, where they dip him over the side. For the benefit of those who haven't seen it, it's quite good. You see, when they realise that Jonah confesses that he's the cause of the trouble and the storm, they're not too sure. They're kindly sailors, and they take Jonah and they lower him into the water. And as soon as his feet touches the water, there's a great calm. So they pull him back up again. The storm breaks in all its fury. They try it once or twice. They decide that Jonah's to blame and throw him overboard. Actually, I think it's great that we're getting those cartoons on television at all. There is something in that eludes me, but never mind. However, it doesn't always happen. Beware, it doesn't always happen. But God gives Jonah a second call. And this time Jonah had learned his lesson. Chapter 3, verses 1, 2, and 3.
When the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you." Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now Nineveh was a very important city. A visit required 3 days.
That's all right. Yes. It's difficult sometimes to tell where verses break in different translations. Yes, that's fine. The fact is that he arose and went to Nineveh. I'm not going to dwell on what happened once he got there. The fact is that he had a second chance. And in the second time, he accepted his work. My last one is a great favourite of mine. It is Amos. I think I like Amos. Well, I'll explain as we go. The book doesn't begin with his call. In fact, we might never have known anything about the call of Amos, but for the fact that Amaziah turned haughtily towards him and spoke down to him. And then we get the call of Amos. It is chapter 7, 12, 13. Amaziah was the priest in the king's sanctuary at Bethel. So let's have Amaziah's little speech from somebody, please.
Then Amaziah said to Amos, "Get out, you seer. Go back to the land of Judah, earn your bread there, and do your prophesying there. Don't prophesy anymore at Bethel, because this is the king's sanctuary and the temple of the kingdom." Amos answered Amaziah, "I was neither a prophet nor a prophet's son, but I was a shepherd. I also took care of sycamore fig trees. But the Lord took me from tending the flock and said to me, 'Go, prophesy to my people Israel.'"
Yes, I was no prophet. I was a shepherd. Your translation says herdsman here, a tender of sycamore sycamore fruit. But the Lord called me. What a conviction. You may be top of a tree at Bethel. You may send me away. But I am here because the Lord called me. You remember this coal strike. We're not liable to forget the coal strike. A young man in Llanfairpwllgwyn, he had his own coal business, and because there was no coal being supplied, he had to sell his business. And in the end, he worked on what had been his own coal lorry. But deep in his heart, he wanted to train for the ministry. And so he sought an interview with a Dr. Teeter Jones at Bangor. And one night he came in, and his wife had the bath running and his good suit laid out, everything ready. And she said, "There's a phone call for you. Dr. Teeter wants to see you this very night." Yes, the scripture tells us that God called Amos from behind the herd. And I have often said that God called David from the coal lorry. Well, now, time has virtually gone, I'm afraid. But does anyone like to say anything that's been on your mind about the prophets and the call of the prophets, the reluctance, anything at all about it?
Just encourage that there have been so many excuses. gives encouragement to all of us, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, yes. Oh, we are full of excuses, are we not? Even after we've answered the call, we find excuses. Well, I understand there is tea, is that correct? There is tea for the thirsty, biscuits for the hungry. I think. And I'll see you again at 11:15 when we're going to look at the false prophets, who are a lot more enthusiastic.